Hello, I'm Venna, and welcome back to more internet drama slop. If you've clicked on this video, then you're at least somewhat aware that recently, a Marvel Rivals creator tournament with a $40,000 prize pool has sparked major controversy after one of its top competitive players, Kingsman, was abruptly and unfairly removed from the event. At the center of this conflict was something, at first, fairly ordinary in competitive settings. Kingsman, known within the Marvel Rivals community as one of the best competitive players and regarded as a powerhouse, was offering normal strategic advice on how to improve his team's chances of winning. What should have been routine competitive feedback was instead framed as hostile, disrespectful, and toxic. This framing done by three members within his own team, Cecee, Zazastack, and Luciyasa, with these three ultimately contributing to Kingsman being kicked from the tournament altogether. Now, as I've alluded to, this is very much drama for those who don't see or touch enough grass. However, from my perspective as an honors psychology undergraduate, it's also genuinely interesting to watch these series of events unfold. And that's because when you look closely at the interactions between Kingsman and these three, which I will refer to as the trio for the remainder of this video, a clear pattern begins to emerge involving defensiveness, hostility, bullying, and an apparent avoidance of accountability. And those patterns help to explain not only why this conflict escalated the way that it did.
First of all, it's that ass Kingsman, like, shut the fuck up.
Okay, bro.
You're doing too much.
But also why so many viewers reacted so strongly and emotionally to it, myself included.
Don't know how he keeps it together. I would be like,
she was 2 and 8. 2 kills, 8 deaths.
And that's what I want to look at today. Why this Marvel Rivals drama escalated the way that it did. Doing so by looking at the psychological mechanisms that help explain why ordinary feedback was interpreted as a threat, why accountability was resisted, and why the handling of the situation both during and after the tournament has provoked such strong backlash from viewers, to the point where the public consensus has largely turned against this trio. In order to examine all of this, let's look at the outline for what we're getting into today. First, I'll give a brief overview of the events surrounding the Marvel Rivals Creator Cup and the conflict between Kingsman and the trio, so we're all up to speed. Then I'll explain the psychological framework or lens that I'm using to analyze this situation. From there, we'll break down why Kingsman's advice was perceived as hostile rather than helpful by the trio, by using some social psychology concepts, including status and ego threat, echo chamber reinforcement, diffusion of responsibility, and hostile attribution bias. Finally, we'll look at why these dynamics provoked such a strong emotional reaction from audiences watching from the outside, and wrap up with what this pattern of behavior may cost moving forward. With all of that said, let's get into it. In January of 2026, the hero-based video game Marvel Rivals had a creator cup with a $40,000 prize pool to showcase the new Deadpool character. The tournament paired content creators with highly ranked competitive players in mixed teams. One of these competitive players, Kingsman, regarded as the #1 magic player, and also having reached top 500 across all other playable characters, was placed on a team alongside several other content creators. Three of these people included Cecee, with her role being the team captain, alongside two other players, Zaza and Luciyasa. During practice matches or scrims for this tournament, a point of tension emerged around Zaza's decision to play Black Widow, a character who is widely regarded as weak or non-viable in most, if not all, team compositions. Kingsman made the suggestion that switching to a stronger character would significantly improve the team's chances of winning, feedback that is both typical and expected in a competitive team environment, especially given the size of the $40,000 prize pool.
Played Deadpool, and whoever didn't have Deadpool auto lost. So I think somebody please learn support pool. I would learn him, but I kind of have to play like main DPS.
a gambit in
Yeah,
his
I agree.
backline.
Well,
Like,
that's the
I
thing.
don't think
Support
every
pool is
team
really
has
good
that.
with triple. That's what makes him really good, is triple support.
Yeah, we're not gonna run
We're not going to run triple support for the tournament?
No, we're not.
Where did you get that idea that we were? You just think it's gonna be hard.
No, I'm... Guys, I want to try hard this
Like,
tourney,
if
but
you don't run triple support, like hard meta, bro, we're never winning.
it's a $40,000 tourney, guys.
This advice was met with strong resistance, as Zaza, the one playing Black Widow, refused to switch characters. Kingsman, being an absolute G with the competitive experience, kept affirming his belief that changing from Black Widow would improve their chances of winning. However, Zaza still refused to switch characters, with Cecee now consistently defending Zaza's decision, framing Kingsman's input as controlling, disrespectful, or toxic. Furthermore, Luciyasa, who was someone Kingsman believed to be a friend, did not challenge this framing as well. Instead, she aligned with Cecee and Zaza's interpretation of Kingsman being the problem, and made several harmful comments that we will talk about in a minute targeted towards him. The point is, the trio openly mocked and belittled Kingsman during these scrims many times, justifying their behavior as prioritizing team vibes over competitiveness. In the view of many observers, and based on behaviors on display, this crossed the line from conflict into outright bullying. Some of the many things things said during the entirety of this incident include, during one time of Kingsman explaining himself, Cecee muting herself and calling him a loser while live streaming, then dismissing his advice sarcastically.
Because Widow is so frail and so squishy, and I know this because I've gone against every Black Widow, #1 Black Widow, all of them, and you run full dive in Populo,
everyone thinks
you
this
just
guy's
dive
a
her and you
loser.
explode her
Kingsman's a
like a
loser.
bug. That's just what happens.
That's such a good point. You're so right about that. And we're still gonna play Widow. I
Constantly telling Kingsman to shut up whenever he speaks.
Will,
so for
Bucky
real,
will
bro.
prevent that.
Like, no one is living a 5-man run into their spawn, bro. Kingsman, shut up, bro. Just mic off.
They're
in
living
2
with triple
seconds,
support.
bro. Thank you. You made your point and it's not gonna happen.
Case and point proven right now. Do you understand?
No, it's
Well,
not.
you've been making
Yes,
me play
it
shit.
is.
Of course I'm gonna
How
play
do you not
Wait,
see the
wait,
problem right now?
First of
How?
all, it's that ass Kingsman, like, shut the fuck up.
Okay, bro.
You're doing too much.
You guys.
Final score 3, 2, 2.
Job. Talk shit to Kingsman now, Zaza.
Another
I haven't
epic
talked shit.
victory.
I just tell people to shut up when they're talking shit. That's all.
Oh, that was bro.
I didn't talk shit at all. Every time I make a suggestion, your only response to me is to tell me to shut the fuck up. Then of course we're not going to have a positive team experience.
And Luciyasa comparing supporting Kingsman to supporting Israel.
I have a genuine question. Like, seriously, answer this. Even if you support Kingsman, whatever, support Kingsman like it's fucking Israel. Anyways.
And for some reason, this baseless accusation.
Now Cecee said that, by the way.
Okay, that's fine.
What the fuck?
Because your chat has fucking pedophiles in it.
What? What? Yo, what the fuck?
Now by this point, this probably would have been a story itself. However, following these scrims, exaggerated and falsified accusations of toxicity and disrespect about Kingsman were made to the event organizer, Bazm. These accusations were compiled in a 12-page Google document by Kaplunk, the boyfriend of Zaza. I don't go into depth about this Google Doc, so if you want to know more about it, I highly suggest watching this video by Muujin, where he explains it in more detail than I care to here, as I don't believe talking about this document, designed to defame Kingsman, is appropriate.
Tell you right now, it was hastily written. There are a lot of grammatical errors, structure that doesn't make much sense, and arguments that are really reaching to the point of delusion.
Anyway, this Google Doc was sent to the event organizer Bazm and ultimately resulted in Kingsman being removed from the tournament without any meaningful attempt at mediation. Despite claiming at one time that she had no involvement, there are clips of Cecee saying that she greenlit the decision to kick Kingsman.
Where he's just like demoralizing my whole team, bro. Like, no, to the point where no one even wanted to play with him. That's kind of what it felt like, bro. Like, when Bossum asked me, he was like, do you think this is alright? Like, is this true? I'm gonna do this. Like, you can greenlight it. And I'm being honest, guys, I greenlit it because my team didn't, like, I had 3 people on my team that just...
As a result, one of the highest ranked competitive players in this tournament was kicked, while the creators who publicly bullied him faced no comparable consequences whatsoever. And in my opinion, Kingsman being kicked here turned this already unfair situation into something much worse. Once clips of the trio's behavior and the surrounding context began to circulate online, public opinion shifted overwhelmingly in Kingsman's favor, with many, if not all, viewers arguing that he had been unfairly scapegoated and punished for just taking a competition seriously and offering normal strategic input. In the days that followed, the trio attempted damage control through some public apologies. One of these apologies includes Cecee on her YouTube channel trying to contextualize everything that she'd done, with this video receiving an overwhelmingly negative reception, which again, I will not speak about in depth due to the level of logical fallacies and manipulation she puts forward. Now that we have context, before moving into the psychological analysis, I want to be clear about the lens through which I'm viewing the trio's behavior. When I first heard about this situation, I initially interpreted their reactions to Kingsman as an acute emotional response. You know, the kind of normal defensiveness that can emerge under stress, frustration, or perceived criticism. And that kind of reaction is common, and under normal circumstances and in isolation, an argument could be made for them and even be somewhat understandable. However, the more I watched this drama unfold and the more I listened to what they had to say during the tournament and respond to afterwards, the harder it became to explain the behavior I observed as a one-off emotional lapse. Instead, what emerged was a pattern of behavior that aligns with well-documented bullying, antisocial, and narcissistic adjacent traits. And I think that by using some of these traits to explain, and importantly not justify, their more abrasive behaviors, it may give better insight into both the escalation of the conflict and the intensity of the audience's reactions to it. This interpretation is further supported by accounts from others within the same community, including a prior incident with the same group involving similar dynamics of control, social leverage, reputation threat, and retaliation. Specifically, this prior incident involves another Marvel Rivals content creator, Antigro, who has publicly stated that he felt direct pressure from Cecee to remain silent about what he described as false and harmful allegations made against him by Luciyasa. Luciyasa herself made several allegations against Antigro in relation to the Charlie Kirk incident, stating things that not only does Antigro not believe in, but he never said in the first place. In other words, she was just outright defaming and lying about him. I can't imagine what made someone make these allegations in the first place, but it's also interesting that this isn't the only time that we're going to examine Luciyasa making a controversial political statement in this video.
Support Kingsman like it's fucking Israel.
But I digress. By Antigro showing us the DMs between himself and Cecee, it was revealed that if he continued trying to clear his name against these false allegations, not only would it be considered harassment towards the group, he would also be kicked and excluded from the Marvel Rivals Creators Discord, who, by the way, Cecee is the leader of. We'll talk more about this incident later, but right now, taken together, this all suggests that what we're seeing here is not merely a momentary stress response, but behavior that may reflect a longer-term interpersonal pattern, reinforced within a social group rather than corrected by it. And I want to be clear, I'm not a licensed psychologist, and I'm not diagnosing anyone with any sort of disorder or condition. And while it may be tempting on some level to speculate about a clinical diagnosis, I think by doing so, it would be neither appropriate nor productive. More importantly, speculating a diagnosis has a huge risk of causing unnecessary harm, both to the individuals involved and to the public understanding of mental health more broadly. Rather, I'm using some bullying, antisocial, and narcissistic adjacent traits solely as analytical reference points, not a clinical label. This is to explain how certain patterns of behavior, where present, can escalate conflict, encourage defensiveness, undermine accountability, and provoke the audience backlash that we've discussed. And as one final point here, in no way am I seeking to justify Cecee, Zaza, or Luciasa's behaviors, and I personally detest the handling of this situation as both extremely harmful and just appalling. Ultimately though, this is my own interpretation, and I encourage you to come to your own conclusions and also leave a comment if you agree or disagree with it. So now with that framework in mind, we can now begin to ask and answer the big question, which is why did advice from Kingsman in a normal competitive team setting feel threatening rather than helpful? And why did this perception cause the situation to escalate? Well, I'm so happy that you, yes you, asked that question to me. And to answer that, I'm going to break this situation down into a few psychological mechanisms that show how ego can turn into threat, what status and ego, echo chambers, diffusion of responsibility and group norms, and hostile attribution biases enter. And please, don't worry if these topics sound new to you or you have no idea what I'm talking about, because this video assumes that you have no prior knowledge of these topics, and I'll explain them as they come up. Now, one of the first things I thought about with this situation was how the trio may have interpreted Kingsman's advice as a status threat, particularly with Zaza. In social psychology, status threat occurs when a person perceives their competence, authority, or social standing as being undermined, even when no harm is intended. Applying that, when Kingsman gave advice to Zaza by pointing out that her character pick did not work for the team composition and was likely to lose the game and therefore the tournament, that feedback was not received as neutral or strategic. Instead, it appears to have been interpreted as an attack on her competence, her legitimacy within the team, and importantly, her social position as a content creator. This reaction matters because status threat doesn't just trigger defensiveness, it also changes how information is processed. Once feedback is perceived as a threat, subsequent feedback or conversation is no longer evaluated on whether it's accurate or helpful, but on whether it challenges someone's standing in front of others. In a public live-streamed environment where audience perception and social capital matter, that threat is amplified. Moreover, it seems to me that this perceived public status threat has also activated ego threat as well. Ego threat occurs when information conflicts with a person's self-image, particularly their sense of competence or legitimacy, meaning that Zaza is being challenged not just how she is seen by others, but also how she sees herself. Let's imagine someone hypothetically for a second who ties their identity and their competence to their self-worth. Then if someone comes along in that same field, especially someone perceived as equally or more capable, and suggests that the decisions that they are making are bad in some way, then ego threat can engage. To Zaza, admitting that her Black Widow pick was ineffective wouldn't simply mean adjusting strategy as it does to most of us. It would mean publicly conceding to a mistake in a high visibility setting. And without having that healthy sense of humility and being able to collaborate here, it helps to explain why not just Zaza, but Cecee and Luciyasa were toxic towards Kingsman, both by proxy and within their group affiliation with each other. The group mechanisms and shared responsibility that both Cecee and Luciyasa share with Zaza we will talk more about later in this video. But for now, all you need to understand is, for them, framing Kingsman as the threat allows the perceived challenge to status and ego to be neutralized without having to confront a potential loss of standing, or the fear of being perceived as an anchor on the team. Next, and arguably just as important, I want to discuss echo chamber reinforcement, which is a process where members of a group repeatedly validate and amplify each other's interpretations, making those interpretations feel increasingly accepted, justified, and unquestionable. Throughout the interactions between Kingsman and the trio, Cecee repeatedly defends the hostile interpretation of Kingsman's behavior rather than than moderating it as the team leader. His advice was framed as controlling or disrespectful, and this framing was reinforced rather than questioned. Zaza and Luciyasa's alignment with Cecee further strengthened this echo chamber, making alternative interpretations of Kingsman's intent increasingly unlikely. And this kind of reinforcement matters because once a narrative is repeatedly affirmed within a group, it becomes increasingly resistant to correction. Dissenting perspectives are sidelined, and escalation starts to feel justified rather than excessive. In this context, the trio's defensiveness and hostility were not only internally motivated, but also socially reinforced through their consistent alignment with their interpretation of events. Put more simply and colloquially, they are gassing each other the fuck up. Echo chamber dynamics like this don't require explicit coordination or malicious intent. They emerge simply when group members prioritize alignment and loyalty over critical evaluation. As a result, behaviors that might otherwise prompt reflection or de-escalation are instead reinforced, allowing for conflict to intensify rather than resolve. And just to echo an idea from before, we are aware that Luciyasa has made very damaging and defamatory statements about Antigro in the past, and we know that Cecee has attempted to silence him when he was just trying to clear his name. That leads me to believe that there is an accepted norm between this trio that not only is speaking and behaving with hostility towards others okay between those three, but it will also be supported and defended by its members. So it makes sense in that we can't rule out the possibility that this bullying echo chamber wasn't already preloaded and ready to fire from the start at the slightest bit of perceived aggression from Kingsman. Having a 1 versus 3 dynamic also helps to diffuse responsibility. With more people supporting or even quietly accepting a particular framing of events, the less any one individual feels personally accountable for how the situation escalates. When responsibility for harm is spread across multiple people, it feels less personal, and escalation becomes easier. In the context of the drama we're talking about, once there was an established interpretation of Kingsman's behavior being negative and it being echoed and supported within the trio, escalation no longer felt like something any one person was doing individually. Hostility, mockery, bullying, and eventually exaggerated fabrications of Kingsman's behavior could be framed as reasonable, socially endorsed reactions rather than personally excessive ones. As I've alluded to before, Cecee, Zaza, and Luciyasa belong to the same in-group, which also helps to explain why there was intervention as forcefully as there was. Because at the end of the day, Kingsman wasn't talking about anyone's pick except for Zaza's, but because Cecee and Luciyasa are within that same group with her, that alignment between them increases both perceived responsibility and perceived threat, and makes justifying their aggression easier. Once a particular interpretation of events becomes dominant within a group, it starts to function as the expected way to respond. This can also be referred to as establishing a group norm, wherein behavior that aligns with the group's shared narrative is rewarded through agreement and validation, while dissent or de-escalation comes with the risk of social friction or exclusion. In that environment, escalation isn't just permitted, it becomes normative. And this matters because diffusion of responsibility lowers the psychological cost of escalation. If multiple people agree that someone else in the outgroup is the problem, then increasingly harsh responses can start to feel justified and necessary, while accountability becomes harder to pinpoint. The harm doesn't feel owned, it feels shared, and therefore easier to commit. Moreover, once responsibility is diffused in this way, de-escalation becomes far less likely, because acknowledging harm would no longer require just one person to reconsider their behavior, it would require the group's shared narrative to be questioned, and for all the individuals to take the full amount of responsibility. That kind of collective self-correction is psychologically difficult just in general, and especially during an act of conflict, it often becomes close to impossible. And finally, to bring this all together, the final mechanism that I think is worth addressing is hostile attribution bias, meaning the tendency to interpret ambiguous or neutral actions as intentionally hostile once a person is in a defensive psychological state. Specifically, Kingsman was not and did not need to be aggressive, rude, or controlling to be treated the way that he was. As we've said many times by this point, once there was an established narrative that his input represented a threat, that's all his actions were interpreted as. Advice was perceived by the trio as aggressive, his disagreement became disrespect, and his persistence was seen as toxicity. This is also where earlier dynamics converge as well. As we've said, the trio has had a history of supporting each other's toxicity and bullying behaviors. Reinforcing echo chambers here strengthens hostile interpretations, and the diffusion of responsibility among the trio reduces the internal friction that might have slowed or prevented escalation. Each mechanism sustains the next, making it increasingly difficult for alternative explanations to Kingsman's input, like being seen as helpful intent, to be considered at all. At this point, with all of these factors happening simultaneously, not only is the conflict no longer being driven by Kingsman's original advice at all, but instead it's being driven by the psychological need to defend a threat that to the trio feels both real and justified. And that brings us to our reaction as the audience. It's undeniable that the reaction to the trio's treatment of the situation both during and after has been overwhelmingly negative, which is very hard to miss if you take a glance the comment sections, reaction videos, and the memes about it. But I don't feel like this reaction is so much about dogpiling on drama for entertainment, and I feel there's a very real psychological reason why we as viewers get provoked by things like this, which I will now explore. For one, us as viewers are more sensitive to perceived injustice. It seems like most of us are coming to the same consensus in that we're seeing a situation where a dude is just trying to give us honest strategic advice on how to win a tournament with a 40k prize pool. He's doing nothing out of the ordinary, and that dude just happens to be one of the best players in that game. And for trying to be helpful, he's being ridiculed, belittled, and even being punished for it. For us as viewers, we can understand that Kingsman was being reasonable and fair, and facing consequences disproportionate to his input. Not to mention that the people that were bullying him, the trio, are left completely unchecked. That imbalance triggers us fundamentally. It may sound silly, but hear me out. For me, I kind of got a similar feeling in this situation to when I watched the first John Wick movie, specifically the part where John's dog is killed. Because even though in that case it's fictional, that unfairness provokes immediate anger. Another example that amplified a negative audience reaction to the current drama is, very surprisingly, the avoidance of accountability. Because once this situation was escalated, only when there was so many eyes on it did any sort of fault get admitted, although admittingly not very effectively. We as an audience, and I feel like just as people, want to see Cecee, Zaza, and Luciyasa take ownership of their faults completely, which they have failed to adequately do. And when that ownership hasn't appeared and they're still defending their actions, frustrations harden and make us feel less empathy for their current situation that they're in. Too many, you fuck around and you find out. And from this, if there's one thing that you take away from this video, it's that being wrong is not what damages credibility, it's refusing to acknowledge being wrong that does. So where does that leave us for the future of the situation? Well, despite all of this, I do very much worry about the mental health of Cecee, Zaza, and Luciyasa. Specifically, I am aware that in situations where someone's beliefs are tied to their identity, status, or self-worth, large-scale criticism tends to produce defensiveness and externalization of blame, rather than reflection and accountability. And let's just lock in for a second and just consider this. If none of these people were unable to admit fault when the stakes were much lower during the drama, then I cannot see how they would genuinely admit fault now when they're receiving so much intense backlash. There are probably thousands of people or more sending hurtful comments to them on various platforms and clowning on them daily. My concern isn't that they're incapable of reflection at all, but rather that the conditions required for critical reflection may no longer be present. Because when criticism becomes overwhelming, continuous, and especially public here, it often stops functioning as feedback and starts functioning as psychological pressure. I also want to take a moment to remind you as a viewer that despite these people doing awful things, they are still people. Have they done bad things?
Like a bug.
Support Kingsman like it's fucking Israel.
Yes. Have they suffered sufficient backlash to what they have done? Yeah, probably. Are they still people and deserve a level of decency? Also yes, but to be honest, it may take some time to feel normal. Maybe I'm more optimistic than the average person, but I think that if nothing else, this drama can change them for the better, and if they don't, then nothing will change for them. And as a quick side note as well, in relation to Basm and his very bad call to kick Kingsman with a rushed defamatory Google Doc, I don't think that he's a bad guy and he made an honest mistake. There's a possibility that he's whipped.
Get it out of my tournament. He disagreed with our character composition.
But I highly doubt that after this he'll make that same mistake again. And for Basm specifically, he's actually taken more accountability than the other parties that we've talked about, and that gives me hope. But back to the main trio. So, what can be done, like, realistically about this? Well, the uncomfortable truth is for the three, it's near impossible for them to win back the trust from their audiences, at least at this current time, and they're far past the point of a perfect apology, especially for Cecee, I'm afraid. I think that moving forward, the best thing that they could do as individuals would be to take a break and stop engaging publicly for a while. And when ready, privately acknowledge the harm that they've caused before publicly explaining anything or apologizing. Not justifying, not contextualizing their actions, but simply saying, hey, I handled this badly, I caused harm, I regret it and have tried to learn from it, and I am sorry. And simply leaving it at that. Sure, us as viewers may not believe it, and they may have to accept that and do it anyway if they want to rebuild their careers as content creators, but it's not impossible to rebuild your credibility and make a comeback. But it will take time and change. And again, if things continue the way that they are currently, unfortunately, I think that this situation is far from over for them. Whether or not they'll be viewed differently in the future is up to them from this point. In my last video talking about pirate software, I could have never imagined that it would receive the amazing reception that it did. And for all of that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the support, your comments, and of course, thank you for watching. I just hope that with all the effort that I put into this video, that maybe one day I'll have more subscribers than my childhood hero, Sigmund Freud. Please do consider subscribing if you enjoyed. I plan to keep making videos, sort of like this one, but involving other psychological topics, and hopefully not just about YouTube drama next time. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.